Hey everybody. First, thank you to you guys. This is day 3 of a conference. It's pretty impressive still to have so many people coming. It's a very tenacious crowd, so thanks for being here. So I thought I might ask you a quick question. So who here is actually familiar with programmatic advertising? Stick your hand up. Let's get a sense. And of those people, which of you are sellers currently, i.e. you're publishers and you're selling using programmatic technology? We have one. How about buyers? How about the buying side of the equation? Okay, some. So I asked that partly just to calibrate my comments a little bit because to some people this is somewhat of an arcane discipline. The reason I'm here though is this arcane discipline is becoming much, much more widespread, and over the next few years is going to become, I don't want to quite say ubiquitous, but extremely widespread in the way that digital media operates and the way that we make money. So first, perhaps I might define programmatic, right? It's probably a helpful place to start. So one way to think about it is a market-based system that enables buyers and sellers to instantly trade digital media. It's very much, the commonest analogy is a stock market, right? Where digital ad space is being put up for auction in real time, and that's where the real-time bidding and selling language came from, and it's being traded in real time, which couldn't have happened 6 or 7 years ago based on the technology that was available at the time. So I thought it might be helpful to set a little bit of context for how we've got to what we call programmatic scale and how we're going into something that we call programmatic sophistication. So there's been 3 basic waves of digital advertising. The first one was classic display advertising, just celebrated its 20th anniversary. The first banner went live 20 years ago. It was an AT&T banner on Wired, I think. And display advertising was basically a straight copy of offline advertising. People thought, hey, I've got content, I've got articles, I need to put ads next to it. This sound is funny. Are you getting this funny sound? It's going up and down a bit. Hope it's okay in the back. And the business model was taken straight from the offline world as well. The pricing was CPM. The business process was very traditional. People sold advertising space, and then they set up insertion orders and they ran the ads. And that became the baseline advertising model for the web. The second wave was paid search, which kicked in 1998 and really became mainstream in the early 2000s. That's where I cut my teeth at a company called Go2, which became Overture. And search was the first web-unique advertising model. And it was unique because it harnessed people's user activity, searching, something that you obviously could not do offline, and it used a click-based business model, which obviously you can't do offline. It's pretty tough to click on the phone book, and it worked beautifully. And it obviously became the economic engine for Google. It's about 70% of their revenue today, and it really took off. Display advertising sort of bumped along, grew with the web, but didn't really evolve until the late 2000s. And there were some problems with display advertising. Essentially, ad space was being sold and bought in bulk. So if you're a buyer, a few people stuck up their hands, you would buy maybe a front page, run of site, run of network, and you'd have to buy all of those ad impressions at scale, right? You couldn't pick and choose what was valuable to you. That meant that there was a lot of waste. That meant sometimes the return on investment wasn't that great. And it's also operationally very traditional. A lot of manual work to traffic and get those campaigns up and running. So we looked at that, and others looked at that in the late 2000s, where there was more data science, more knowledge about users, much cheaper computing power, and the ability to apply algorithms to that data science at real time. And in 2009, the first programmatic ad exchanges were launched. And the beauty of these was they solved a series of those problems that I just outlined. So now, as a buyer, an advertiser, you could look at an impression in real time, which actually means about 150 to 200 milliseconds. A bit faster than a blink of the eye, quite a bit actually. And you could bid on that. You could say, hey, this user matches this set of rules that I have set up, essentially an algorithm. The algorithm would run, value that impression, and make a bid. So that's great for buyers because you're starting to be able to buy at immense scale, but very precisely, which is perfect. And you can buy at scale because the exchanges are putting together supply from many different publishers into one marketplace. So instead of having to go across 500 publishers and do separate deals, you can do one set of buying on one exchange and buy at scale. So really good for the buyers. Actually also really good for the sellers, because now you have access to a liquid, highly competitive marketplace for your ad inventory. So I used to work at Yahoo, used to run a lot of their ad business, and we would have to trade some of our lower value inventory, trade it off to ad networks who would buy a big glob lot of inventory. And we always wondered, are we getting taken to the cleaners on this inventory? The answer was, yeah, basically. And the reason was some of that inventory was really valuable and some of it was less valuable. But now as a publisher with a real-time exchange, a programmatic marketplace, you could put that inventory in, allow competition to ensue, and see the highest prices float to the top. And you could have control. You could decide who would have visibility into your inventory, who would be able to bid, and have quality controls over the creative. So all of those things came together to create this programmatic revolution, which really started in 2009. And as Spencer mentioned, it wasn't even called programmatic back then, it was called real-time bidding. And a whole new ecosystem of players popped up. There's companies like mine, that's mainly on the marketplace side, a whole set of companies that help buyers. Those are called demand-side platforms. They're basically like algorithmic companies that can buy super fast. They're like flash traders. And this grew. So over the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, this industry has gone from a standing start, 0, to over $5 billion in less than 5 years, and is well on its way to $10 billion. And we think a lot further than that. So that's what I want to talk about for the last few minutes here, is the shift to programmatic sophistication. So I think of that first 5-year phase, 2009, 2014, as scale. The business model proved itself. It clearly works, and it creates value for both sets of participants. But it's pretty simple, actually. It's fairly homogeneous. I can break that down for you into 3 dimensions. The first is screens. So most of programmatic scale occurred on the traditional form of web consumption. Laptops, desktops, not really so much on mobile. The second dimension is ad formats. It's mainly been taking place on traditional display ad units, static units, and rich media. And then on sales channels, the third dimension, it's mainly happened with open market trading with lower value inventory, which is where things start out. Most new technologies are applied to the lower value segments of the market and then begin to move up the value chain as they're proven out, and some of the kinks, and there are obviously kinks in programmatic, begin to get ironed out and people get comfortable and really understand what's going on. So if you think about those 3 dimensions, what is happening now? Programmatic is now being applied across multiple screens. The most obvious is mobile, everything that we have in our pockets. But also what's coming up in the next 2 to 3 years is the application of programmatic to any digitally connected screen. That includes TVs, that includes screens in cabs, that includes screens in elevators. There's a lot of those in New York. They're long rides. And if you think about it, really extrapolate, once we get to the point where we have things like self-driving cars, we're sitting there looking at a great big fat screen, right? And we get bored quickly. So what's going to appear on those screens? Media, right? Information. And more likely that some of that media is going to be ad-supported, right? So you're begin to have advertising in screens and places that are just beginning to be imagined. And we think that most of the advertising that's going to be transacted on those screens is going to be programmatic in nature, simply because the scale, the diversity, the heterogeneity is going to be very hard for humans to engage in. Second, ad formats. Regular display banners, great, but what's becoming much more important now is video, is native, and various permutations of that. So we expect to see those evolve and programmatic to be applied to many more different formats of advertising over the next few years. The third area is the sales channel, right? And this is perhaps one of the most interesting. So typically when this started out, people would put their lower value, sometimes what was called remnant or unsold inventory, into the programmatic channel because they didn't want to create channel conflict with their direct sales force. Now that they're seeing that I can control programmatic, I can decide what inventory to put in, I can decide the reserve price or the starting price of the auction, I can control quality, I can control access, I can control a varying amount of data that I might want to transfer to the buyer in order for them to inform their bid. I can control all of those variables. So maybe I can start to put higher value inventory into that. So you're starting to see a trend, sometimes called private marketplaces, some of you may have heard of, or programmatic direct, which is using a direct sales force, i.e. people still selling, but using programmatic infrastructure, which is more efficient and more effective to actually do the execution. So those three dimensions are all kicking in. So we're actually in an inflection point right now. And often you look back and you say, oh, that was an inflection point. It was kind of obvious later, but we're actually in it right now. So over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see all of those dimensions play out, and this form of advertising, therefore, become a lot more ubiquitous. Now, one of the points I did want to make is that this sounds like it's the machines taking over, right? Every time you hear this kind of data science, algorithms, software, you're like, what happens to us? What do we do? And Spencer and I were just talking about this backstage. We actually see this as a really great window for us to apply our higher form of intelligence. And what we're seeing is people focused less on the transactional and the executional work, the operational grunt work, if you like, and beginning to spend more time on revenue strategy, creative strategy, and thinking through how are you going to get someone's attention. So there's a lot of advertising. How do you create something that is going to catch someone's eye and inspire them, motivate desire for a product or service, which is actually what advertising is, of course, about. And instead of worrying about the details of how to actually get this stuff running, let's turn that over to the machines and focus on the higher value, more human-oriented stuff that's going on. And that's beginning. You're seeing, for example, ad operations teams start to look like and act more like analytic revenue operations teams at publishers. And you're seeing a similar thing at the advertising side of the house. So programmatic sophistication doesn't even need to end with advertising. Think about content, right? How do we choose what content we serve up to our consumers, be that on a website or an app? And how do we make that content as appealing as possible? Well, wouldn't a set of data science and algorithms and real-time technology that can select the best possible piece of content and feed that to the consumer possibly be useful? So we're anticipating programmatic actually shifting outside of just advertising into content and other areas. You know, I read, just to give you an example of this, I read Paddy's post about this conference and why it scaled up so quickly. And he talked about, you know, what he characterized as a surprising insight that a lot of it was based on data science and software and deciding how to create something that bring a lot of people together and helping them connect. Even though there's a huge amount of people here, how would you connect with the right people? And I wrote him a note back saying, you've basically created the first programmatic conference, right? Which is you've used human insight, but you've levered that up with data science and with algorithms to try and help people make connections at a far greater scale and efficiency than they ever could have done before. So that's what we see happening with programmatic. There were a lot of people here who didn't raise their hands. And I think, you know, the main point, if you were to take anything away here, is this strange, arcane little bit of the industry, which has grown to be a fairly decent size, is going to be across a very large swath of our landscape. And so if you're a content creator, if you're on the monetization side, if you're building a business that has any component of advertising and the relationship with content, over the next couple of years, it is highly likely to be part of your situation. And so I highly encourage you to spend more time with your programmatic team, if you have one, or hire a programmatic team, or get to know people who are really immersed in this area, because it's going to be super important. Thank you very much for your time.